Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Greenwald's webinar, exploring HRAs and HSAs for long-term savings. My name is Lisa Greenwald. I'm the CEO of Greenwald Research, and this is a very special year for all of us at Greenwald. We are commemorating our 40th anniversary. And in appreciation of all of you and in celebration of that milestone, we're hosting a series of thought-provoking webinars throughout the year. We're going to be speaking with thought leaders from across the health and wealth space, spanning retirement, benefits, and health, and sharing insights on relevant topics that impact Greenwald's clients and friends. So be sure to visit our website at greenwaldresearch.com for updates on future events. For today, we are very excited to welcome two experts from Gallagher, a leading global insurance brokerage, risk management, and consulting firm. First up, we have David Ritchie, National Practice Leader of Account-Based Health Plans and Trusts. He's responsible for sales leadership, product development, and the creation of new distribution channels. He engages healthcare consulting firms and other advisors, Taft-Hartley representatives, and public and private sector employers to create tax-free solutions to pre- and post-retirement healthcare expenses. David has established himself as a national expert on VIBA, HRA, and HSA issues, and he brings nearly 20 years of industry leadership covering all aspects of employee benefits. And next, we have Richard Snyder, who is a certified plan fiduciary advisor and has over 25 years of institutional retirement plan experience. As an area senior vice president, Richard works with employers, trustees, and committees on their fiduciary responsibilities as it relates to investments, plan design, compliance, service, and fee structures in the retirement plan. He focuses on industry best practices in order to continuously help improve plan health and participant outcomes for their DC, DB, and post-retirement health savings plans. We also have Greenwald's very own Lisa Weber-Raley, our Chief Research Officer and most senior healthcare researcher. Lisa works on studies, HSA studies related to participants, participant segmentation, and journey, as well as doing work with employers to understand how and why they structure their health benefits as they do. And while Lisa focuses on health, I tend to focus more on retirement plan and retirement planning. So together we have a really great balance of health and wealth to discuss HSAs and HRAs for long-term savings. If you have any questions, we're going to be taking those at the end of our discussion, but please submit them through chat as you think of them. We'll be keeping an eye on that. So let's dive in. And I think unless you've been living under a rock, most of us know that healthcare costs are a pretty big concern for retirement preparation and for those already retired. And just a few stats to help us get started. The Ebry Greenwald Retirement Confidence Survey found that 2 in 5 Americans say planning for healthcare and long-term care in retirement is a top 3 long-term financial priority. It was the #1 priority for retirees. It was the #2 priority for workers. And yet, only 4 in 10 Americans have ever tried to calculate how much money they should save for health expenses in retirement. So Rich and Dave, what do those stats mean to you? How much should people be saving for healthcare expenses in retirement?
Well, Lisa, if you agree with the actuaries, which I do, you need at least $315,000 for health care through retirement for a married couple. Now, I've seen numbers as high or as north of 450,000. So it's really dependent on where you live, what your expenses are, et cetera. But $315,000 is the gold standard of what someone's going to need.
So could the two of you walk us through a little of the history, the evolution of health savings accounts as a broad category? You know, where did we start and where are we now with what's available for employers and employees?
You know, what we see available for employers and employees to participate in is a couple different plans that can help get to where we need to be to get to that $315,000. You know, we have the old standby, the health FSA that is completely underutilized, but it's still there and it's still a very good product to have pre-tax dollars to pay for out-of-pocket medical expenses while employed. We also have the notional HRA or the funded HRA, and as you mentioned, we have the HSA. So you know, all of these products can work together or can work independently. However, coupling the health FSA with either a HRA or HSA will go further and help employees save more money in the long run.
So for those in the audience who might be as confused by all those acronyms as I once was, can you differentiate those accounts? What are the advantages, disadvantages of each?
So let's FSAs. I started my career selling FSAs so long ago. I actually had hair on my head, so it's been a while. But the health FSA is in place to help put pre-tax dollars into an account to pay for expenses for a plan year. Okay, we do have a use it or lose it criteria on there. We are now allowed to roll over money up to $500 per year. So it eliminates a lot of that angst of the use it or lose it. So we have that plan on the shelf. A notional HRA is an account that is set up by an employer and funded by the employer to help employees with out-of-pocket medical expenses. Notional HRAs are kind of funded through monopoly money. And what I mean by that is we are promised an amount, but our employer only pays what the claim is. So if my claim is only $100, but I get $1,000 a year in this account, my employer is only liable for $100 because that's what the claim is for. So that was a really good way to what I call buy down deductibles and have an employer save premium dollars and then fund that notional account. A funded HRA is completely different than a notional in the fact that it's funded. So whatever the employer determines that the contribution is going to be, the employer, the union, whoever is making these decisions, that has to be funded. The nice thing about the funded HRA is there's a triple tax advantage. Earnings, contributions, withdrawals are all tax-free. Also in the funded HRA, we have a very liberal set of rules that we can follow to fund this. Now, there is still discrimination issues, and that's attached to the HRA, but you know, we can get into that later. That could be a whole nother discussion that we could have. And then finally, the HSA. The HSA was supposed to be the silver bullet of medical premiums years ago when it came out. And it was, you know, premiums were very low, you know, fully insured was high, premiums for the HSA was lower, and then employers were using the premium savings to seed these accounts for employees. In the HSA, there is also a triple tax advantage. Earnings, contributions, and withdrawals are tax-free. Also in the HSA, you're not required to have an administrator adjudicate claims, so it makes it easier for participants to access their money. So that kind of sums up the plans. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about HRAs and HSAs further down the road here, but I hope that answered your questions.
It does indeed, and hoping you and then maybe Lisa too can help answer this next one, right? One of the other things I've seen in the retirement confidence data is about 30% of Americans claiming that they have an HSA, health savings account. I'm just curious, does that ring true to you? What is happening with health savings account prevalence and use?
I think the numbers could be correct. However, I would challenge those numbers to say, yes, you have an HSA account, but how many of you are funding the HSA account? How much are you are underfunding it? And then how much are you truly fully funding that account? That's the data that makes a difference to me. It's not how many accounts are out there, but how many people are funding these accounts to prepare for that $315,000 number.
Yeah, and Lisa, I like that you said they say they have an HSA because we know from our research that consumers get confused about these accounts. They get confused as to whether they have a medical FSA, an HSA, or an HRA. So from our research with EBRI in the consumer engagement and healthcare study, we've tracked HSA account ownership over the past 20 years. And in the past 5 years, it's been pretty consistently around 17 to 20% of consumers say they have a high deductible health plan with an HSA. But to Dave's point, some of those consumers are not funding those accounts or not getting contributions in them. And I do think one thing that's important to remember is those HSAs are paired with a high deductible health plan. And there's a good number of consumers, employees out there, privately insured folks that don't really get a choice in what plans they're picking from. So about 3 in 10 don't have a choice in health plans. So sort of they get what they get. And we see that in our consumer engagement and healthcare study.
So I hear triple tax advantage, and I think, well, why isn't everyone doing this? But it sounds like we actually see quite low utilization funding, even if there is an account. Why is that? You know, I know from the work Greenwald's done, these accounts are still treated as very transactional rather than for long-term savings. So what do each of you feel are some of the reasons or the barriers around that?
Jump in first. I think the pairing with a high deductible health plan is there is an emotional component to this. It's not always a financial decision when it comes to healthcare. There is a fear that you will face a high cost healthcare event or prescription. And you don't like not having that money there to cover that on day one. I also think, you know, there's an element of inertia. People like the plan that they're in and they don't like switching or changing. So I do think there's some issues there. But I mean, perhaps Rich, Dave, you guys can speak to this. You know, we see from other research, Kaiser in particular, you know, it's about a quarter of workers that have a high deductible health plan actually have their employer contributing to that high deductible health plan. HSA account, and so that's not the majority, it's the exception rather.
Right. Yeah, Lisa, I agree with everything that you said. I would also add, I think it's sticker shock as well. I don't think, you know, to your point of the prescription coverage and the coverages that they're used to, a lot of folks who are offered these plans can't afford to put, you know, $4,300 if they're a single or $8,500 if they're a family to fully fund the HSA. You know, so that's an issue. Education is also an issue, as Lisa said, or I'm going to go health Lisa and financial Lisa so we can, yeah, as financial Lisa said, you know, there is issues with you know, just the education piece alone because of the acronyms that even I got up here and spouted to people in this industry are like, what the heck is that? So when, you know, when someone like me is talking to people, we have to make sure we explain what these acronyms are and how they benefit our participants, our employees, whoever is signing up for the plan needs to be educated.
And Lisa, you mentioned this, right? That tax benefit is really appealing. We know that consumers find that appealing. But the sort of barrier is for a lot of people, this is a checking account. The money is going in and it's coming out. I've got to pay for my kids' braces. How am I going to pay for that? Right. So that's the challenge there for a lot of the consumer perspective.
See, and you know, education, health, Lisa, and financial, Lisa. Let's talk about orthodontia for a minute. So if I had an HSA, Lisa just said, you know, people are pulling money out of their HSA for their orthodontia care, when they probably have a limited scope FSA for dental and vision services where they could contribute pre-tax dollars into the FSA for their orthodontia and also be contributing pre-tax dollars that are going to grow over time into their HSA. They're protecting their HSA because now they have the limited scope FSA to pull those dollars out of. And that's what that plan is intended for. There's special rules on orthodontia in the FSA. So educating folks on how to maximize their benefits is going to get more folks excited and more participating in the plan.
I definitely want to talk more about education here in a minute, but you know, Rich, I think we get a turn to talk about one of the other things I think is really attractive about the HSA as opposed to these other accounts, and that is if, and it sounds like a big if, funded, you have the option to invest that money. Can you describe what the investment component of an HSA looks like, and why don't we see greater use of that?
Absolutely, Lisa. Lisa Financial. Yeah, what we try to do with the HSA and the HRAs is to mirror a lineup that you would typically see in a 401k or 403b, 457, covering the 9 box, if that makes sense. You have a what's really important for these investors in these medical accounts. It is a good fixed accounts, cash fund or stable value product, target date funds, and then a mixture of large cap, small cap, mid caps, and international funds. But what we typically see is the greatest utilage of these investments and allocation is in the fixed bucket or the conservative target date funds, because people don't want to get too risky with this money. Now, when you design a plan and people are planning for long-term health savings, then you know you have a great mixture of options that for them to consider, like the S&P 500 in you know target date 60s funds, etc. So it gives them a good mixture of investment options and that they can choose from to invest in for the long term and short term, because there's a lot of money moving around to pay for premiums and out-of-pocket medical. So that's where we see a lot of attraction to a really solid, stable value product in these types of accounts. And then you have on the HRA side, you have some police and fire union plans that are more run like a defined benefit plan, where we're looking to achieve a stated return of 6-7%, and we're managing the overall portfolio. So, but we set these things up like we do in the K side and the B side with an investment policy statement. We're monitoring that and we're making changes accordingly as funds fall out of favor.
So we just heard about all the confusion people have with these different accounts. You know, do you think it's confusing for the participant to get to the point of investing their HSA dollars and then see a full investment menu? Is there any case to be made to simplify that? Maybe just an asset allocation or a target date like you might see in a 529?
I think you could, depending on the plan and the employer, but across the board, I don't think you want to choose a broad-based investment fund lineup for all types of investors and based on their horizon to retire. So, you know, that's why we structure it similar to the K plan, because ultimately this is a long-term investment and you're still going to need growth of the funds in retirement to cover medical. So.
One thing on that financial, Lisa, is if you look at what 90% of participants in these plans do is they keep their money in the default plan because they just don't know what to do. They're not getting the tools or the resources, or maybe they are and they're just ignoring them, which could be true. But looking at that default plan, and I would strongly suggest our employers who are on the call today to look at the default and is it first dollar investing or is it a cash account where they have to maintain a minimum balance before they invest? Look for those firms that do first dollar investing, because then if you have an employee who is like 90% of the rest of the population in these plans, and by the way, that applies for HSAs as well as HRAs, that 90% target. If you have that, at least they're getting a better return on that money because that it's typically invested into a stable value fund that is paying more than what the cash product is crediting them.
So one more question before we talk more about the education, how we help employers and employees with these decisions, right? All these different accounts. Talk to me a little bit about what happens at retirement with each of these accounts. What can a retiree do and not do with an HRA versus an HSA?
It's pretty, first off, at retirement, there's no more contributions going into any plan. Okay. So there's one thing. And then they can use the dollars to offset their out-of-pocket expenses, whether it's Medicare premiums, doctor visits, dental visits. I believe Medicare still, and maybe Health Lisa can help me here, Medicare still doesn't cover dental coverage or hearing aids. So, stuff that's anything that's medically necessary or following the 213D list. We hear that a lot as employees going to benefit fairs or to open enrollment meetings. Everyone says the 213D list, basically anything that's medically necessary.
All right, so what about education? What types of education, meetings, or messaging is really needed to help employers put the right plan in place for their employees and then for employees to understand and fully participate?
So, yeah, I'll jump in there first. So just to sort of level set on some of the information that we know. We know that there's still a pervasive lack of knowledge among consumers or sort of employees about these types of accounts and how they work. Only about 6 in 10 consumers correctly know that you can use your HSA funds to pay for medical expenses in retirement, which is the main advantage of these accounts. And only a third know that HSAs can be invested. So there's sort of a disconnect with consumers, and I'd love to hear Dave and Rich talk more about that. But there also, we know from our qualitative work and talking with employers or plan sponsors or groups, that a lot of people who are making decisions about the benefit structures may themselves not understand a lot about these plans, especially if it's a smaller firm, someone wearing many hats. And so they really can lean heavily on their broker or their consultant for that information. So I think there's probably a two-prong approach would be my guess. And I'd love to hear how Dave and Rich feel about that.
Oh, I have a lot of strong opinions about education.
That's why we're here, Dave.
Yeah, it's not, how do I say this? We need to do a better job educating. And what I mean is, in your typical open enrollment environment, your benefits go first. So your medical plan, then your dental plan, and usually the last 5 minutes is for the spending accounts, the education of the spending accounts. There is no way that a representative from any company can fully educate everyone in that room in 5 minutes about the rules of the HSA. Let's think about it. There's a lot of rules There's different ways to invest. There's explaining the cash plan if that's available, or explaining the first dollar investing. There just isn't enough time. So my suggestion is always, okay, let's have a separate meeting for the HSA, not the medical part of the HSA, but the financial part, and then bring the investment advisor in as well to do education on how should they invest. You know, maybe there's target date funds and they just want to go in there. I mean, the investment advisor can look at the lineup and give a quick recommendation to someone, which is more than they're getting in that 5 minutes that they would normally get. So having a separate meeting, an education meeting on how to make these plans work, benefits people. When we do that, we see that 90% group start investing after. So taking the time pays dividends in the future.
So if we're fortunate enough, hypothetically, to get that dedicated meeting and explain the rules of the HSA, including the investment component, an employee who has that next dollar still has a question mark in front of them, right? Do I put this next dollar in my 401k, or do I put this next dollar in my HSA? So how do you explain the strategy for saving both in the DC plan and the HSA?
So there's a couple different strategies out there where you maximize both. And what I mean is there's going to be some people who reach their limit, their contribution limit to their 401k. Every year they meet that limit, and then they have a few months of the year to where they're not contributing. At that point, when someone meets their limit, then they should start fully funding their HSA, or they can swap that. And once they reach, continue to put the minimum contribution to get your 401k match, but maximize your HSA until that is fully, till you're at your limit there, and then start bumping up your 401k. And we see that strategy work in most instances. But again, it's, do I put money into my HSA, or do I buy milk for my kids? And that's what a lot of people are facing.
Talk about that quite a bit in the retirement plan space as well. And just an out there question, right? One of the ways the DC plan has solved for that is automatic enrollment, an automatic increase. Asking all of you, think we'll ever get there with the HSA?
I'm going to let Health Lisa take that one first.
No one wants to go first?
No, for many reasons, right? I think the first decision point lies with the employer. And so, right, employers shifted to high deductible health plans to save healthcare costs, right? Health insurance for employees is expensive. It's usually a big line item in the budget. And so shifting to high deductible health plans had a promise of a lower premium. And so, I think if you're an employer, right, this is sort of the cynic side of me. If you're an employer and you're trying to save money on healthcare costs, and you're trying to engage your employees to make smart care decisions, which is sort of the other part of a high deductible health plan, and you auto enroll all those employees in that high deductible health plan in the HSA with a promise of funding, then you're adding dollars that you're funding, like guaranteed dollars that you're funding as the employer. So that's why I don't think it's going to take off, is because the math doesn't math, as the kids would say, right? For the employer side of it. But we also know, like, consumers just don't spend a lot of brain power on open enrollment and these kinds of benefit decisions. Less than 2 hours, I think, is the majority of people spending on choosing their entire benefit package at open enrollment. They're not spending a lot of time thinking about the HSAs. So while that's an appealing idea, I'm not sure it'll happen.
Well, Lisa, as I try and pull your product and tool into my world, here's another bite at that apple. Should we be showing retirement plan balances and HSA balances together? Does that help with the education piece of this? What do you all think of that idea?
Yeah, I can take that too. In the retirement side, we have a lot of great data aggregation tools that paint a nice picture. And with our clients, we also include the single sign-on for the HSA for the participants so they can see their balance on that main page as well. And that way it paints a complete picture for the participant to understand how much money will they have at retirement or in retirement. And like David said, that magical $315,000 number is going to help them better make that decision of when to retire and can they afford to retire with these exceptional costs. So I think all the technology is there, and with a lot of our clients, that's also included in the single sign-on, so the participants can gather that information and make sound decisions.
So are there any changes that could be made to HSAs or HRAs for that matter that would really boost their utilization and especially boost their utilization for the long term for retirement healthcare expenses?
I think, one of the ideas that we've been playing around with is the education policy statement, which is a best practice in our retirement world, and embedding that into the HSA, HRA solution as well, where you partner as the advisor on these plans with the employer and the administrator to better educate the participants on the benefits of these types of medical savings plans. And what we're seeing now is also including the financial wellness program, so that way the participants can get coaching on how to spend their dollars. And we're starting to see some significant improvement in participation as a result. So I think that best practice in the retirement world would make a lot of sense in embedding it into the medical savings plans.
And I think we also need to look at the plan design for the health plans that these health savings accounts are attached to. Are we trying to limit access to care by offering the HSA? I don't think it increases access. If we have a funded HRA with a very benefit rich plan, we're not seeing more utilization in that plan. But in the HSA, we're seeing people not being able to get services because they don't have enough money to pay for it. So, making some changes into the plan design, even, carving out prescriptions and letting those be covered under a prescription drug plan would be a huge step forward. I mean, Lisa, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but.
Yeah, I mean, that fear, right? I mean, we see this with all health plans. Year one that you're on that health plan, you don't really like it that much. Year two, it's a little bit better. Year three and beyond is good because you got used to the inner workings of the plan, what's covered, what's not, where do I go? What we see with high deductible health plans, even paired with an HSA, is that it's that same sort of climbing up the hill. Year one is not good. Year two is better. Year three and beyond is better. But it still doesn't ever get to the level of what we call a traditional plan. And it's because of that sort of, I believe, the fear of that cost and sort of needing to cover that cost. I think the idea of, even if it's not legally decoupled from the high deductible health plan, but visually, we're getting creative about how consumers might think of that bucket of money, less as a checking account, more as a long-term, this is for my retirement, healthcare expenses. Anything that you can do to get them to think differently about that account would be positive. But the reality is there's a lot of people out there that if they have $50 in an HSA and face a $40 copay for their prescription, they need to tap that money in the HSA because otherwise they might not be able to afford their grocery bill then.
Dave, there was another change you mentioned in our prep call that I thought was interesting because all these different accounts are really complex. The rules around them are complex. You mentioned that changing this restriction around dual coverage might
Right.
really help utilization and use. Could you say more about that for the
Yeah.
audience?
So, if I have an HSA right now and I'm on my spouse's plan, I can't contribute into the health savings account because that's dual coverage. Makes absolutely no sense to me, but that's one of the rules. If they did away with that, we might see more utilization in the HSA or more contributions into the HSA. So the dual coverage rule is one of those that I don't quite understand. I think in theory I can get it, but at this point, I don't think it matters anymore. So let's look at that. Let's look at the prescription drug coverage as well. There's very small things that I think Congress can do to change it and make this plan better, but it's just not on the horizons.
What about eligible expenses? Do you think that we have the right menu, if you will, of eligible expenses, or does that need to be expanded or retracted in some way?
Well, I think the intent of both of these programs in the funded HRA or in the HSA is to cover out-of-pocket medical expenses. I know we can talk about other benefits that are offered, like the LSA or the lifestyle spending account, which has nothing to do with the medical plan, by the way. Those accounts are existing out there for people or employers who want to give their employees more. But to pull money out of your HSA or to divert dollars from an HSA that would normally go into an HSA into an LSA is a bad idea because it doesn't get the triple tax advantage.
Yeah.
So
I
go
think
ahead.
for some context there, there's some people that would like to see HSAs expanded so that you could cover things like your gym membership or, some other things that are in the health space that arguably will create preventive health benefits for that person long-term. And so to me, I just think so few people are funding their HSAs sufficiently. They're using it as a checking account. They're not getting to the level where they can invest long-term, like Rich described. And so if you open it up even more, then it's going to just continue to have even more spent coming out of that account.
Did I ask
Yeah,
one of you to please explain the LSA and also, again, that's next dollar. Does it go to the HSA or the LSA? How do we communicate that to people?
The lifestyle spending account is an account that is funded by the employer to improve the well-being of the employees. That could be covering the gym membership cost. That could be going to the zoo for a mental health day. There's a plethora of benefits that don't fall into the HSA or the HRA 213D list that the LSA could cover. However, I believe, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, that account is taxed. So when the employer contributes money in there, that's a taxable benefit. So, we don't offer them at Gallagher. It's not something that we're interested in because, in my opinion, is the employer should just give their employee a pay raise. That's going to be far more beneficial than an LSA account.
Got it. One more question before I get to my big wrap up for your recommendations. We've been hearing a lot about HRAs. How do HRAs fit into this puzzle? What are they trying to address within this landscape?
I see how Lisa's going to let me take this one.
I'm looking at you, Dave. Yeah.
Go for it, Dave.
ICHRAs are interesting right now. I think they're being marketed as the next silver bullet for healthcare. And it really does limit the expense to the employer, because the employer is capping off, right? And saying, this is how much money you're going to get per month. Go out on the market and buy your insurance that way. And there's companies, I mean, even here at Gallagher, we have a company that will help people find the appropriate benefit for their budgeted amount. And if they want to get a more lucrative or a more benefit friendly plan, they would just pay with, payroll deduction at that point. So, we are looking at ICHRAs as something for the future for sure. However, I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know, is it going to be like the HSA silver bullet that essentially just did away with all the premium savings over time? I don't think so. But we do know the cost of insurance is going to continue to go up. And if an employer can cap their expenses, which the ICHRA allows them to do, it's probably good for the employer. And I don't necessarily think it's bad for employees either, because they can go out on the open market and pick the plan that best suits their needs. So, what happens to those excess benefit dollars, though, that the employer is not contributing? If I choose let's say I chose the lowest cost plan, we're seeing those dollars going back to the employee in some way or form. So, it's time will tell. And I think that can be, another discussion in a year from now to see how that's working out.
So everyone's here, everyone's curious. What is the ideal account or the ideal package of accounts that helps people with long-term savings for healthcare? Which one's your favorite?
I'm a funded HRA guy. I love the funded HRA space. Unfortunately, we primarily only see it in the public sector or in bargain groups. It has all the bells and whistles of the HSA without all of the restrictions of the HSA. Now, don't get me wrong, it has its own restrictions, but those I can swallow better than like the dual coverage rule. So I do like both plans. I think there's a plan for every client. HSAs, private sector, all day long. Public sector should be utilizing a funded HRA, but you also have to remember all of these plans that I mentioned, the flexible spending account, the HSA, and the funded HRA can all stack and work together. And, if there's a consultant who wants to understand that, send me an email and let's talk about it.
Lisa, Rich, do you guys have a preference?
Yeah, I mean, the HSA is what I know best, right? Because that's what we have, but also private sector, not public sector. I think if there were a way to solve or stack the accounts so that you could solve for some of the urgent, emergent expenses that people do face in healthcare without them having to tap that HSA. So when I think about this, I think, much how Wealth Lisa would say, emergency savings is all the rage on the financial services side, because it is a way to stack and prevent people from pulling money out of that 401k. Is there a solution that's comparable on the health side that can be arranged?
Yeah, and Rich, you may have an opinion. The more I've spoken to you all and learned about this, it sounds a lot like emergency savings and 401ks, right? Where we have a need to deal with today's issues while also saving for the long term, right? And so maybe it is stacking one for each purpose. But Rich, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I'm more on David's side with the funded HRA. And the reason why is, that is truly designed for the public sector. A lot of police, fire, teacher unions adopt these programs. And versus the participation rates in the HSA, the HRAs are mandatory. So when you design these plans, all the participants have to participate in the program. You can carve out certain groups and that, but everybody that bargains for it participates, which helps drive the numbers, right? For those folks to have that pool of money to retire on and cover their premiums and out-of-pocket medical. So I'm more inclined to say the funded HRA, just because of the plan design features make it more attractive for those employers.
To echo what Health Lisa was saying, I agree with everything she said, by the way, but the HSA is designed now to inadvertently make people spend their money out of that. And what I mean by that is, even if in a stacked situation where they had an HSA and a funded HRA, the funded HRA cannot pay until that deductible has been satisfied on that medical plan for the HSA. So we still have to come up with either a single or a family deductible before other benefits can be paid in. So I don't know if we would ever get that emergency savings account under the current design of the plan now.
All right, well, thanks everyone. We're going to pause and see if there are any questions from the folks who have been listening in. If you do, please pop them in the chat. We'll give you a minute or two to do that. Otherwise, if we don't see anything, we'll give you a few minutes back in your day.
Like there is one in the Q&A, Lisa, not in the chat.
Thank you. All right, and I am going to just read this to you all. We'll figure out who's going to take it. In a time where many employers are still having a large remote population and struggle to get people to tune in, isn't the future of the industry requiring expansion of enrollment platforms to promote benefits and enable information at the time of open enrollment, maybe even requiring a review prior to election? Currently, there is a gap of being able to reach these folks.
I would say, I would feel like the education has to continue beyond, and engagement has to continue beyond open enrollment, just because there's just not enough time to cover everything. And if the thought is you have a remote workforce, maybe they're less engaged, you're on a Zoom call listening to the open enrollment presentation, you're even less engaged maybe than you would have been sitting in a conference room. I think you have to have that conversation continue, because while the sign up for the HSA might be happening at open enrollment and deciding the contributions, the decisions about how you use it or whether you invest might happen down the road. I don't know, Dave, Rich, you know, all the rest.
I think if an employer is waiting to educate their employees at open enrollment, they've already lost the battle. Especially, I think it's a really good question about the remote employees, because we all have that. I have that personally on my team. And, doing quarterly webinars, monthly webinars on education, having your investment advisor come in and do an education twice a year via Zoom is more than what they're getting through an enrollment platform. Yeah, some enrollment platforms are amazing, don't get me wrong. There's videos, there's tools out there for people to use, but most people click right through it and just want to get it done. So, offering education throughout the year is going to benefit more people in the long run than just focusing on the enrollment platform.
Also, I think it was important what Rich mentioned, right? And putting it as part of the financial wellness conversation with potentially a coach for people to talk to might help them pay more attention, even remotely. We've got another one, and for context, this is referring to an issue within the defined contribution space and comparing, if you're not familiar, do HSAs face the same challenge with people having multiple small balances across HSAs and across multiple employers where the risk is they simply spend it or forget they have it? So do we see that pattern with HSAs?
It depends. Is it a problem? Sure, it could be. However, you have to remember that once the account is funded, that is the participant's account. So, even when an administrator or an employer goes to a different administrator to manage their HSA plan, the participant has to physically move their money from the old administrator to the new administrator. It's not like in the retirement world where it just automatically rolls over. So really the participants in the driving seat, if they have 5 accounts out there with, $100, $200, $300 in it, they can combine that all into one. It's going to take some work for them. We can't do that for them right now. So, and I think the risk is basically the only one who's benefiting from those small balances are the administrator, because they're still hitting that account for fees. So it would be in their best interest to take the time to consolidate those accounts with their current administrator.
Is, I think, a similar problem to what's faced with DC plans. We've got one more. Since insurance works best when incidence is low and severity is high, what are your predictions for the ability for HSAs and high deductible health plans putting the insurance back into medical insurance, which today is largely a way to prepay for small claims?
That is a great question statement. That's part of the problem, I think, is that many people don't view health insurance, medical insurance as an insurance or risk protection product. And they believe that when they go to the doctor for routine care, that their insurance should cover it. It's like a payment plan. I paid into it. It should cover this ear infection for me, as opposed to I paid into it and it's going to cover me if I were to get cancer and have to face a very long journey through the medical system. I don't believe high deductible health plans have been around for about 20 years. I don't believe that that's shifted people's conception of health insurance. And I think part of the problem is when you go get care, you don't know how much it costs. There's no price tag on it. So I don't know how to answer that question, but man, it's a good one.
Well, I think the idea of consumerism is dead because, Lisa, you're absolutely right. People don't know what the cost is. And, we talked earlier about the first year people don't like it. Well, it's because the first year they're going to get their prescriptions and they understand now their prescription's $100, not $5. So, they are getting the sticker shock the first year. And the second year, they're kind of swallowing the sticker shock. And by the third year, they're kind of like, well, this is our new normal. So we're just going to go with it. But yeah, I mean, these plans were designed, even the HRA was designed with consumerism in mind. And that's gone out the window, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
it just doesn't exist.
It's hard to shop for healthcare for so many reasons. One, there's no price tags. You don't know what you're going to get. You actually don't know what you're paying until months later. Sometimes you get that EOB.
Sometimes you're not conscious when you need it. I mean, there
Yeah.
are a lot of reasons.
Or are in a place where you're unable to make a rational decision, right? If you get a cancer diagnosis, we've heard this from patients. That is the word you hear, cancer. You don't hear anything else. You don't hear anything else about your treatment plan. I mean, you need a caregiver there to sort of take all the notes down. There's a whole sort of set of emotional concerns underlying this. And then on top of that, now you've got to figure out, well, how much is chemotherapy going to cost, and how much might this surgery cost? So, I think I do think what has high deductible health plans, what it has done is made consumers question things, question costs. Ask for generic substitutions, maybe instead of a name brand prescription. It has encouraged some of that behavior. It's also encouraged some not so great behavior that we might not like, which is like, I'm cutting my pills in half to stretch them, or skipping a doctor's visit out of concerns for cost. So I don't have the answer. I wish it did, but I think it's a complicated issue.
Right. Well, I'm going to call that our last question of the afternoon. This has been great and I've enjoyed it so much, but we are at the end of our time together. So to our viewers, thank you for joining us both on behalf of Greenwald and Gallagher. HSAs feel like such a no-brainer to me with that triple tax advantage, but I think we've learned about some important challenges to keep in mind that my retirement-leaning brain didn't fully appreciate at first, right? Employees still need a way to pay for today's deductibles and expenses while saving for the long term. And, I think we've all agreed, however, everyone on this call, our prep call, and today, that seeing and talking about the HSA as part of wellness and as part of the retirement conversation almost feels like a better fit than with the health insurance in many ways. And I will say, I've also learned a lot about HRAs that I did not know before. And it makes me think about retirement income planning, which is July's webinar topic. But I think about a world in which retirees have access to a funded HRA, and what the implications are for retirement planning and income planning. Really sort of thought-provoking. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Rich, for giving us so much to think about. And again, thank you to everyone who joined today. Please stay tuned for more. You can learn more about Greenwald's anniversary events and activities on our website, including our November in-person Health and Wealth Symposium that we hope you will all consider joining us for. And with that, thanks again and have a great afternoon. Try to stay cool out there.